Hi, everyone. I'm Dory Rappaport. I'm the Executive Director at Justice North. And I just have to say, you have heard a lot about the justice gap. So you heard it from Senator Klobuchar, you heard it from LSC's board chair, you heard about it from LSC's president, you heard about it from our Chief Justice. And I have to say, the Chief Justice's analogy about the US Bank Stadium, that was a new one. And wow, like that, 12 lawyers to serve the US Bank Stadium. I mean, that's the justice gap in Minnesota. Ooh, we lost lights.
We're punctuating the concept of.
I hit a button. I'm so sorry. Oh, wow. Thanks, Jessica. You're the best. All right. So I'm going to give you another justice gap statistic. Americans experience 150 million to 250 million new civil justice problems each year, putting their housing, employment, healthcare, education, and families more at risk. LSC's 2022 Justice Gap Study found that more than 9 out of 10 cases, low-income Americans don't receive adequate legal help for their civil legal problems because, as you know, legal aid programs are forced to turn away half of the eligible applicants who make it to their doors. One conclusion is the reality that there aren't enough affordable, accessible lawyers to go around. The other is that lawyers are not the entirety of the solution. There's a growing movement to rethink who can provide legal services, especially in certain settings like family and housing matters. 9 states and counting, including our wonderful state of Minnesota, permit allied legal professionals, or yes, paraprofessionals, to practice either independently or with attorney supervision. And as of February 2024, 5 states have community-based justice workers, all with varied training requirements, scope of service, and regulatory oversight. As Chief Justice Hudson stated, in the fall of 2020, our Minnesota Supreme Court inaugurated a legal paraprofessional pilot program which runs through August. The pilot project permits legal paraprofessionals under the supervision of a Minnesota licensed attorney to provide legal advice and, in some cases, represent clients in court. Additionally, my colleagues from Anishinaabe Legal Services have adopted another promising innovation, community justice workers, that has shown tangible success in rural and remote areas where lawyers are sparse and tribal communities face compounding barriers to accessing justice, like cultural and language differences. You'll hear from them momentarily. So this brings us to our panel discussion. As Minnesota's legal professional program pilot is under consideration by our Supreme Court to be a permanent model in Minnesota, we want to unpack those lessons learned to inform not only the court's decision, but also guide other states that may want to undertake similar experiments that look beyond lawyers to close the justice gap. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed panel. First, we have Cody Nelson. Cody is the Executive Director at Anishinaabe Legal Services, which provides legal assistance to historically underserved people living on or near Leech Lake, Red Lake, and White Earth tribal lands to protect legal rights and tribal sovereignty. Cody has been with Anishinaabe since graduating from St. Thomas Law School in 2006. Jenna Finn is a paralegal and community justice worker with Anishinaabe Legal Services. She co-chairs Anishinabe's Housing Committee and serves as an elected member of the Prescott Local Indian Council for the Leech Lake Reservation. Born and raised in northern Minnesota, Jenna and her family make their home in Cass Lake. She's been with Anishinaabe for 2 years. Jim Long is an attorney at Maslin Firm in Minneapolis and previously was at the old Briggs & Morgan firm, where he was in charge of their pro bono program for many years. Jim is an appointed member of both the Minnesota Supreme Court's Legal Services Advisory Committee, as well as the Minnesota Supreme Court's Standing Committee for the Legal Paraprofessional Pilot Project. He also teaches antitrust law as an adjunct at the University of Minnesota Law School. And finally, my colleague, Rachel Albertson, Innovation Manager at Justice North. In her nearly 20 years on staff, Rachel has worn many hats to ensure equal access to justice in rural Minnesota. Rachel is a certified paralegal and a participant in the state's Legal Paraprofessional Project. So let's get started and hear from our panel. Rachel and Jenna, I often hear a parallel drawn between the diversity of healthcare professionals by the way we could be providing legal services. So highlighting how it's not just doctors, but also nurse practitioners, certified nurses assistants, community health aides, specialists, generalists. So could you, given this sort of comparison, talk to us about and help us understand your roles as community justice worker and a paraprofessional? So let's start with Jenna. Try again. The green.
Testing.
There you go.
Okay. So my role as community justice worker has been so many things since I started. I am fairly new, and but I am learning, and it's basically my community members. I am a community member. I grew up in Leech Lake, and it's very easy to see what they need, and it's easy for them to tell me, compared to a lawyer, that the help that they need, and just, yeah.
So you can really relate to them. Do you find that you being part of their community makes you more accessible to them?
Oh yeah. It's I see every day what most of them go through, and it's not. A lot of them need help, and it's not necessarily from a lawyer. It's just simple things like referrals to resources, just finding the help that they need. We help a lot with people that are going through child protection cases, and there's so many mothers and fathers that want to do better but just don't have the means to, they're struggling with so many other things like addiction, little to no income, just so many things that they need help with, and that really could help them to be in a better place.
Thank you so much. Rachel, do you want to talk about being a paraprofessional?
Sure. Thanks, Story. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Maybe it was my voice. Sorry. Okay, as Story said, I have had many roles over the past 20 years and kind of have seen the progression, which is very exciting. The momentum recently towards access to justice is exciting, and it's an exciting time to be a paralegal. My current role doesn't necessarily allow me to be the traditional paralegal, therefore not the traditional paraprofessional. But we are lucky enough at Justice North to have 5 of those on our team. My experience is mostly in outreach. And so whether I am taking the justice bus somewhere or just going to a rural location and meeting people, the fact that I can, in certain circumstances, actually meet people, do the application, look at the crumpled documents that they're holding, and give them advice all in one time frame, right? Not the callbacks, not the connection issues, has been a real, it's been a great experience because it's a great client experience, right? And so before having to meet them, get their documents, and then refer it to somebody else when it's an issue that I would be able to handle as a Minnesota paraprofessional, has just kind of made the process so much better for really both sides. More efficient for legal aid side, better client service. And beyond me and my personal experiences at Justice North, we've seen the benefits by paraprofessionals appearing in at hearings on their own family cases, right? That then provided more resources for attorneys to take the cases that are not allowed under the paraprofessional program. We've also had paraprofessionals appear in virtual housing court calendars where they show up. And so over the course, I would just say in the last year, I mean, hundreds of cases in just our organization have been handled by paraprofessionals, which then you can just imagine how much more, how much that allows attorneys to take more cases and how much more efficient that is. So I'm probably talking too long, and I'm sorry, I don't see clock or minutes, and I'm just gonna ramble. So I'll wrap that up. Thanks.
Well, and Rachel, that was a great comparison. I mean, what I'm hearing is paraprofessionals are able to free up the time of lawyers the way like nurse practitioners are able to free up the time of doctors. And so I'm going to pivot to Cody now. And Cody, so an underlying premise to this conversation is that maybe lawyers aren't always the necessary and ideal helpers. And actually, Access to Justice scholar Rebecca Sandifer has written that across several common problems, non-lawyer advocates and unrepresented lay people have been observed to perform as well or better than lawyers. So Cody, based on your experience at Anishinaabes with community justice workers, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. So community justice workers, for a long time we called them lay advocates, but I'm just going to call them community justice workers or CJWs for the purpose of today's panel. They've been a critical component of our service delivery model since I first started there in 2006. I've been fortunate to work alongside many talented CJWs who have mentored me as an attorney, collaborated with me on tricky cases, and delivered the highest quality of legal assistance to our community members. So I just have a couple examples. One is Mary Smith. Her work centered around serving elders throughout our tribal communities. Mary worked for our program for nearly 40 years. Elders didn't want to get help from our program attorneys. They wanted to get help from Mary. They would just walk in and say, hey, I want to talk with Mary. The relationships she built and the reputation among the senior populations were truly second to none. And then there was Mary Ringhan. She was our Red Lake Reservation community justice worker. She was born and grew up on the Red Lake Nation in Panema and had resided there most of her life. She worked for us for over 4 years, delivering a wide range of high-quality legal services throughout Red Lake. She was so effective that she was recruited by the Red Lake Nation to become one of their judges, and she has been on the bench now for over 10 years, many of which serving as Chief Justice. Our attorneys and CJWs actually often appear before her in the Red Lake Nation Tribal Court. And then I'll talk a little bit, just to finish, as another example is Rita Osman. She's currently our lead CJW, and she's worked for us for about a decade now. She's focused on Social Security disability advocacy and representation, and she is licensed with the Social Security Administration as a non-attorney representative. Her tireless advocacy and commitment to her clients is legendary throughout our communities. And so an example of just the effectiveness of her work is we have contracts in place with the Minnesota Department of Human Services where if we take on a case for Social Security disability for a low-income tribal member and we prevail in that matter, we will receive some payment from the state for taking that case and getting them approved for benefits. Rita is so effective that she raised over $100,000 for our program last year alone just because of the volume of the cases she takes and how many of these she's prevailed for her clients on. So it's a big part of our practice, and she trains in our lawyers, and sometimes she gets frustrated because they can't often keep up with her. And so I have other examples more than that, but you kind of get the picture. But in 18 years with the program, I've seen CJW's quality of work meet or exceed attorney coworkers. And we're really excited to have 2 new CJWs starting with us this year, including Jenna, who's doing just a fantastic job with the program. So.
Okay, Cody, those were incredible examples that make the point that sometimes lawyers are not the answer and not who is preferred by communities that we're trying to reach. They have that trusting relationship and it's unmatched. Jenna, can you talk to us a little bit about what your training and your mentorship has looked like as you've taken on this community justice worker role?
Yeah, sure. I am currently enrolled in courses, Alaska Pacific University, and just self-paced courses. And it's that's going well. On top of that, I've done so many trainings, expungement trainings, just you name it, civil legal aid issue trainings. And I've also worked with Val Field. She's our litigation director for Anishinaabe Legal Services. And she's amazing, as well as Sherry. She's our administration director, and she's just an overall great person. And she knows the community as well, and has been a really good role model to show me the way. And yeah, it's been good.
It sounds like an incredible support system. Jim, we're going to pivot to you. So in January 2024, the standing committee on which you serve recommended to the Supreme Court that they make the pilot program permanent. What contributed to this recommendation?
So obviously this was a pilot, and throughout the 3.5 years of the standing committee, we were focused both on getting it up and running and administering it, but also knew that we would have to make recommendations at the end, and so we're focused on that. And in the order adopting the pilot rule, Chief Justice Gilday really explained what we were piloting. And what she wrote was that the purpose of the pilot was to test the assumptions that the need for civil legal aid, particularly in the areas of family law and landlord-tenant disputes, is great, and that legal paraprofessionals can contribute to the needs of Minnesota citizens in these areas. And so that's what we were focused on. And to not bury the lead, clearly what we found was that yes, not only were the needs great, but this program really could provide access to justice to those that otherwise would not get it. And so throughout the program, we were focused on different criteria, but we were looking at both numbers and obviously we were looking at quality. And so from terms of numbers, what I can give you is that we worked through the judicial branch, looking at MnSIS data and other data. At the end of the 3 years of the program, or at the end of the 3 years when we issued our report, through MnSIS, just talking about closed cases handled by paraprofessionals, there were 259 cases, but that was only the tip of the iceberg because we also had self-reported closed cases from both the paraprofessionals and also from organizations such as Justice North and the other legal aid societies. And there we had 2,312 closed self-reported cases. And many of those came through SMERLs, through Justice North, Legal Assistance of Olmsted County, and others. And also the geographic scope of this program, just through the MnSIS data, 40 of the 87 Minnesota judicial districts had closed cases handled by paraprofessionals. So this was really provided access to a large geographic area. And then on quality, we very early in the program put together a complaint process for clients and others who had touched the work by the paraprofessional. It was communicated to the clients in the engagement letters. It was on the judicial branch website. It was very accessible. And for the close to 2,600 closed cases, we had 0 complaints. And that really, for us, was a big deal. Beyond that, throughout the program every year, we did surveys. And I have to say that the folks at the judicial branch that were great support, spent untold hours on getting these surveys out to the paraprofessionals themselves, to the clients, to the judicial officers, and to the supervising attorneys. And so every year in the fall, we had surveys. And if you want to get in depth in this, go to the judicial branch website where you'll see our report. But just to give you a few numbers, of the responding supervising attorneys, 85% reported being very satisfied with the program. Over 90% reported that they wish to continue in their role, and all were in favor of making the program permanent. Of the responding paraprofessionals, all were satisfied, and most of them very satisfied All were in favor of making it permanent, and all indicated they stay with the program. And with respect to the clients, of the 17 respondents in our last survey, 15 of 17 of them were satisfied or very satisfied, and the same number recommended that the program be made permanent. And so from that, we really had great statistics. And the last thing I want to say is, for me, what brought home the success of this program, frankly, was the efforts of folks like Justice North and Smurls and all the legal aid societies that really took this to heart and really used it in a way that clearly expanded great access to justice. And you know, Dora, you can talk about it, but, or Rachel, you can talk about it. But this really, but for the efforts of you folks, this might not have been viewed as the success that clearly it is, and provides a way for folks outside of legal aid now to grab onto this project and go forward.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm sure as people have just listened to what you had to say, listen to that feedback. Like, it sounds incredible. And so I'm going to ask you and Rachel now to talk about if other states are looking to implement something similar, what advice do you have for them? And maybe in your answer, also bring up if there's any sort of what you've heard as like skeptics concerns, because that would really help people move forward with the same model. So Jim, Rachel, whoever wants to go first.
You want me to start? All right. So I think first to emphasize that this is another tool in the tool belt for access to justice. And if you start out explaining that's really the purpose of this, I think it takes care of some of the skepticism. And obviously one of the skepticism is this taking work away from lawyers? And throughout all of this, we've tried to stress that paraprofessionals under this setup are not in competition with lawyers. And this is not a situation where a client who's going to go to a paraprofessional under this program has the choice between a paraprofessional and a lawyer. In almost all instances, the client has a choice between a paraprofessional and no representation whatsoever. And all of us that have done any amount of pro bono work or in this area know that having clients pro se, I don't have to tell this to the judges in the audience, is just such a difficult position for them to be in, and to have quality representation through paraprofessionals really, really makes a difference. But it is not competition with the lawyers. And particularly in our setup, where we have the supervising attorney who signs on with the paraprofessional, has the duties to supervise. This is underneath the Minnesota Supervised Practice Rules. And so there really is no competition. And it also is, these folks are very, very qualified. But for people that don't have that sense, you have the backstop of supervising attorneys who ensure that a paraprofessional is not taking a task that the supervising attorney doesn't think they're ready for. And then the last thing I'd say is don't set the expectations up too high. I mean, it took us a while to get rolling on this. Having COVID did not help much and to roll this out. But these programs take some amount of time, and you look to see on a smaller sample size, and then you push from it. I mean, we only initially had certain aspects of housing court and family court. As you'll hear at the end, we have recommended some expansions, but don't have too high expectations, and just focus on what the real purpose is.
Thanks, Jim. Rachel?
Try to be quick here, but everything Jim said. And so there's obviously education requirements or experience or a combination of both. Paraprofessionals aren't just anyone who wants to be a legal paraprofessional. So you have to be qualified and under supervision of an attorney. The education requirements for an associate's paralegal degree or bachelor degree, you really learned a lot about ethics and ethical rules, which includes, the traditional legal advice, how you're protecting attorneys' licenses. No one's going above and beyond that. Basically, at the end of the day, the people who are paraprofessionals in Minnesota really understand and have no intention of giving bad advice. And so I think there's a lot of protections beyond for that, basically, for the training and the paraprofessionals. So I guess the other thing I would say is just look at the data, not only Minnesota's reports of the pilot project, but around the country. And then because we're mostly all legal professionals in this room, I would encourage anyone who is looking to start a program like this to just go beyond that. And I appreciate all the voices and all the people who have opinions about this, and it's very important for the legal community to have those heard. It's also really important to get feedback and information about people who can't afford to hire a private attorney, and people who get turned away from legal aid because we don't have resources, and people who don't know what to do when they're served with court papers, and people who have had their children, lost custody because they didn't respond to paperwork. And just don't forget about hearing their voices.
So true, Rachel. And, that's a good segue back to you, Cody, to talk about the voice of the communities receiving services from community justice workers. So, Cody, based on your experience with community justice workers at Anishinaabe, what difference does this make for them? And how would you say this might be better justice?
Oh, thanks, Dory. Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. And, I think this difference is reflected in the licensing process used by our area tribal courts. So our tribes are inherently government entities, and so tribes get to decide who gets to practice before their courts. And our tribal courts permit the license of non-attorney advocates if they meet specific criteria, which varies from tribe to tribe. And that's how, for instance, as I discussed earlier, our Red Lake CJW became a judge on their tribal court. She had been licensed and representing clients for Anishinaabe Legal Services before their court for several years. They saw what a great job she was making and a difference she was making for their relatives. And so they appointed her to the bench. Tribes have long recognized that it's important to incorporate more than just attorneys to try to ensure justice in their communities. And so we're able to get our CJWs licensed before the tribal courts, and we try to get them licensed to as many of the tribal courts as possible within our area. And since most of our courtroom advocacy is before the tribal courts, it helps us to significantly enhance our program services. But zooming back a bit though, a key aspect of community justice workers is finding individuals with a significant connection to the community to be served. So often our CJWs are born and raised and have spent most of their lives in the communities within our service area. These CJWs understand the community needs, challenges, barriers, and strengths far better than those who come from the outside. And the reality is, as much as we want to hire attorneys who are from our service area, this doesn't happen nearly as often as we'd like. Our service area is hyper-rural, and there is a significant lack of professional service workers on the whole. Doctors, lawyers, CPAs. When we hire for an attorney position, half the time they don't have a connection to our area, and oftentimes our applicants come from outstate. So we do a lot of in-house training to build understanding of cultural history, tradition, and cultural competency, but that training can never come close to reaching the understanding that comes from someone within the community. And in fact, often our CJWs informally do a lot of training and mentoring with our attorneys in those areas, which is really helpful. And a number of our community members prefer to get help from local community member CJWs as opposed to our attorneys. I mean, it's getting help from one of their own as opposed to from an outsider. I found that as long as the services are delivered competently and compassionately, clients often tell our CJWs they'd prefer to work with them than our attorneys. And then finally, CJWs are indispensable in helping us to forge and maintain collaborative relationships with partners and stakeholders throughout our tribal communities. Many CJWs have personal relationships and contacts coming in that we leverage to better serve clients. And they're also the ones who are most frequently out in the community at events and other gatherings, meeting with the public and other agency representatives, spreading awareness of our program and services. So that's a crucial component of our programming, and nobody is better equipped to lead those efforts than CJWs.
Thanks, Cody. So to close out our conversation today, I'd like to ask everyone on the panel to share a call to action. So what's one thing we can do to make a material difference in the justice gap? Who wants to start? Jim wants to start. Yeah, okay.
Mine is obvious. Assuming that at least some of the recommendations of the standing committee are adopted by the Supreme Court and this becomes a permanent program, I ask all of you who are in a position to access this program to take another look at it. Through 3 years, we know it works. The pilot has shown that it works. And I think there's a great deal of opportunity to really expand the scope of this. We have made recommendations that, to the extent they're accepted, would add areas of practice to paraprofessionals. And we've also recommended the name now be legal practitioner. But, and those range from debt representation and conciliation court or in district court up to $15,000, based in large part upon the MSBA's wonderful report that you've all heard about. Criminal expungement, certain limited areas and license revocation in Office of Administrative Hearings, and other areas. Also, for those of you in Minneapolis, we have recommended that the 4th Judicial District Housing Court be included for paraprofessionals, which I think for some of you pro bono coordinators can give you some more access to this program. But I really ask for you, those of you that are interested in another tool to address access to justice, please read our report, evaluate it. You know where to find me. I'm easy on the internet to find at maslin.com. Call up any of us on the standing committee and we can talk to you about this.
Thanks, Jim. Let's go to Cody. All good.
Well, I would just say my call to action or understanding is that this idea is it's not a new concept. It's been going on in tribal communities since court systems first developed there. Even outside of tribal communities, the federal government has permitted non-attorneys to represent client and practice law in various administrative matters for over 60 years now. If the CJW model was not successful, if it was not helpful, it would not be continuing on as long as it has. And when over 90% of people are not able to access an attorney, we need to look at new ways to do things. And this is a promising model. It's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve the problem completely on its own, but it's an important part of the solution, in my opinion.
Agreed. Thanks so much for that, Cody. Jenna?
My call to action would be to just learn more about it. Just maybe visit some communities, see how much it is working, attend some outreach events that we attend, and we kind of speak with the community members on the issues they're having, and you really get a sense of what is going on and how many people need help. So yeah, just getting out there and seeing for yourself.
Thank you, Jenna.
Yes.
Rachel?
All of the above. My call to action is access to justice is important to everyone in this room, or you wouldn't be here, I'm guessing. We have heard a lot about wonderful innovations and programs happening in Minnesota today that really are working towards providing actual equal access to justice. And we've also heard the other side of the statistics that show we're absolutely not there, nowhere close. So my call to action is just get involved. We're not going to pro bono our way out of this if you're an attorney in this room, but don't stop, right? If you're interested in the paraprofessional project, read the report. If you're interested in tribal court, read their rules. Let's learn some lessons from them. They've been doing this for a long time, and it's been working there. And we can also learn things from other business aspects, right? We don't have to keep this in just the legal space, which is kind of back to the original reference of the medical community. They do not have brain surgeons putting Band-Aids on people in urgent care, right? I mean, and there's a reason for that. And so we're getting closer with this paraprofessional project, and I think we can do more. So whatever space that is for you, I just hope you're an advocate in that area.
Let's give this panel a big round of applause.